Good morning and welcome back to AkamaiTV. It is day 2 from streaming to you live in 4K HDR from the floor of IBC 2018. I'm Shane Keats and we've got a great show for you today. Coming up shortly, we're going to hear from John Linder from SwissText about the challenges of doing live subtitling. Really important topic given that about 5% of the world's population has challenges with hearing. Dave Otten from JW Player is going to be with us talking about the complexity of player technology in the device landscape that we've got today. Paul Tweedy from the BBC will be here. He'll share some insights about delivering 4K for Wimbledon and the World Cup. Jeroen Elfrich will join us from Ex Machina talking about the power of the app. Dan Hurwitz from Panthera a little later on today about today's mobile consumer, the mobile video viewer and how challenging that can be. Alexander Lashinsky from Geisendorfer Lashinsky will join us as well to talk about universal service obligations in the age of OTT. And finally later this evening we'll hear again from AkamaiTV Unplugged when the Luck will join us around 5 p.m. for some live music. Joining me this morning though is Jay Coley. Jay is one of the leaders of Akamai's cloud security business here in Europe. Jay Coley, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm glad to have you here. Jay, you spent about 10 years in the military during both Gulf Wars, so on some level I'm not surprised that you ended up in the security business. What was it about the world of internet security that was so compelling to you? What drew you to that business?
Well, it was a natural extension of what we were doing in the military, looking at patterns, global events happening around security events, et cetera. So it was just a natural extension from that I just slipped into really easily once I came out of the forces.
One of the things that I find about security is it seems like it's a constant arms race, that both sides are playing cat and mouse and trying to get at each other. Is that something that carried over from your military experience that you see happening here?
Indeed. When they'll always build a higher ladder, we need to build a longer wall, higher wall. It's just a natural evolution of things, and we see that all the time. You know, as attacks become more frequent, we end up mitigating them easier, but then there's always the zero-day threats that pop up. So again, the ladder gets longer.
Just before we started the program, you were sharing with me an analogy, and broadcasters and OTT providers are facing a really interesting landscape today that they really didn't have to face, let's say, 10 years ago. They become really juicy targets for the bad guys. Yeah. And you had an analogy for how they might think about how they can protect themselves. I wonder if you can share that with us.
Sure. The analogy is called herd immunity. We hear about it all the time in the news today with vaccinations, et cetera. But the idea is with a human population, the more immune we become to certain illnesses, the better we're able to protect those that have no immunity in there. And with security, it's a common thing that we need to look at, that the more we immunize ourselves against threats, the better we protect those that don't have that immunity.
So are you saying that if the more media companies that protect themselves, the more everyone else gets protected? Is that what you're saying?
In general, yes. The idea is that threats and attacks, how often they're used has a direct correlation to the effectiveness of those attacks. If those attacks or those threats aren't effective anymore, then the malicious actors aren't going to use them anymore. They're going to use something else. Thus, we protect those that may not have that security immunity that we're talking about. If the industry as a whole has really good defenses against the more common attacks, then those attacks will eventually go away.
So this is that concept of the arms race again. So as we kind of immunize ourselves against a particular kind of threat vector, the bad guys then move away and try to figure out something else.
Yes, they'll always look for an easier target. If the target's too hard or the threat or attack isn't working, they'll try something else or move on to another target.
So help a broadcaster or an OTT programmer who doesn't really think about this very often. How do they do that? What do they do in order to practice herd immunity?
First of all, they have to communicate. They have to talk to each other. Organizations must talk to each other about what threats they're seeing, issues they're seeing in security around their industry, they must talk about it. We see this is a very common best practice we see in organizations like financials, banking. They have very established lines of communications in the background.
They got like the red phone to each other?
Exactly, that they communicate and share information with to help build that immunity amongst their industry.
But wait a minute, because the media industry is probably one of the most competitive industries out there. I mean, maybe banking is equally competitive, but these guys live and breathe over box office, ratings, like they want to kill each other. And basically you're suggesting that they should get together and cooperate? This is weird to me.
Well, compete where you need to compete, but cooperate where you have to. So if you look at finance or banking, they compete on the account side. They want more accounts, they want more mortgages, et cetera. They compete on that side with interest rates, et cetera, but they don't compete on the security side. They make sure that they're talking to each other, they're spreading information around to make that industry stronger so they can then concentrate on where their primary business avenue is, and that's the banking side of it.
So on mission critical stuff, continue to compete, but on things that aren't core differentiations, cooperate.
Exactly, especially around security.
10, 15 years ago, security for most media companies was, I want to protect my file from being pirated on a P2P file sharing site. The attack surfaces have changed a lot, I think, particularly as media companies have moved their businesses increasingly online into online streaming. Let's help folks think about the kinds of surfaces that the bad guys are looking at. And what if we start with the login page? So broadcasters and OTT providers have increasingly embraced the subscription model of monetization. There's a lot of benefits to it. It allows for recurring revenue and so on. But in the process of that, they're collecting a lot of data that I think is of interest to the hacker. Help us understand, when the hacker looks at a login page, what is it that they're seeing and what is it they're trying to get?
When a hacker looks at a login page, they typically see money, a way to capture money. And there are instances where usernames and logins have been leaked on the dark web, et cetera, and you can buy these at a small price, say $6 to $8 per login. And what the attackers will do is they will then use their botnets to test these logins across multiple sites to try and gain access. Once they have access, then they can commit fraud. Or they can condense that list and sell it on for a higher price. These logins actually work, so they can sell it on to the fraudsters for a higher price there. So it's the whole point of these machines trying to impersonate a human to log into these login sites, and then they can take over that account. They can go in, change the passwords, and then manipulate that account as they see fit.
And then if I'm a less than ethical viewer, I can purchase one of these or get one of these cheap logins for these services, something like that?
That's one of the ideas, yeah. Yeah, that is.
Okay, botnet. For a lot of our viewers, they're not going to understand what a botnet is and how that works. Can you share a little bit about how that happens?
A botnet is just a group of, a small or a large group of machines that do something for you, right? Whether that is scanning and scraping, where you're looking at pricing online, or you're running a DDoS attack, or you're doing credential abuse. A botnet is a group of machines, whether that's IoT devices, everything's connected to the internet today in your homes, the video cameras, your routers, your televisions, light bulbs, refrigerators, all those are online now, and all those can be seconded into a botnet if they're not properly secured.
And then how do I, as a hacker, employ a botnet? Am I understanding correctly, you can actually rent these things now?
You can rent them, yes. They employ botnets because it's too hard to do this manually, right? It's economies of scale there, and you have a lot more flexibility. Most of these botnets are built on Linux with a Linux full TCP stack in there. They can kind of do what they want with them, right? They can, send them, as I said before, for scraping, scanning, hacking, web application attacks, DDoS. It just depends on what you want to do with that botnet.
All right, so they've got to worry about the login page because that's where the bad guys are going after. They're using this thing called a credential stuffing attack. What do you do to prevent this? What's the solution to this challenge?
Well, the solution is to determine, is it a human or a machine, right? So there's certain aspects of how a human will interact with their device, whether that's a mobile device or your laptop or your PC, on, for example, keystrokes, mouse movements, etc. We take all that data and we compile it, and we look at that data and say, this is a human and this is a bot. Because a bot, it's very difficult to imitate a human. There's a saying that says, nature doesn't do straight lines. Humans don't do straight lines. It's very hard for us to draw a perfect straight line, whereas machines tend to go from point A to point B. So it's very easy to differentiate in many cases.
Let's shift gears to a different attack surface, and a human attack surface, if you will. I remember the Target attack from a couple of years back, the US retailer, that 70 million customer logins were stolen. Turns out that the attack vector was a third-party vendor, an HVAC vendor, who was poorly protected, and that's how the bad guys got in. Here in Europe, TV5 Monde shared the results of their analysis of the attack that took down, I think, 10 or 12 of their channels for 18 hours. Turns out it was a remote camera vendor who got hacked through some VPN software that the vendor was using. Media workflows are inherently complex, and there's a lot of handoffs as a mezzanine kind of works its way through the workflow. Journalists having to access CMSs and so on. And not all freelance journalists, not all of these vendors are properly protected. When a hacker's looking at this, what are they seeing as opportunity?
Any entry point is an opportunity. Any external facing application, any important protocol that may be left open in a firewall that's unnoticed. So it's important for organizations to operate what we call a zero trust model. This is where there is no clear delineation of what's mine, what's inside my network and trusted and what's outside my network is untrusted. Everything is untrusted today. You must authenticate everything, whether that's inside your network and outside your network. And that's what happened with Target, was when that vendor came in, they were behind the firewall, and that hack occurred that way.
But how do we give access if we're not trusting? It seems contradictory.
Right, so you can give access without letting users behind the firewall, right? So Akamai has a service called Enterprise Application Access, where we're able to take certain applications and take them out to the cloud, where users actually use those applications without coming back through the firewall. So you're not punching holes through your firewall for every individual user or vendor or contractor that needs these applications. You're now putting them on the Akamai edge, where they access it there without coming back through the firewall. So they get only the applications that they need, and they can't send any other data laterally.
They don't get that all access badge that allows them to go backstage and hang out with the rock stars and the proprietary files. We live in an increasingly charged political world, and media companies by nature produce content that someone in the world is going to be offended by. Maybe it's people with strong political feelings, people with strong nationalist feelings, maybe it's nation states. Do media companies need to be worried about this? What's your view?
Yes, they should be worried about this. And it's been going on for years, censorship type of attacks where certain political organizations or nation states don't want certain information released. We saw that with the Sony attack.
Right.
Exactly. We've seen that with we saw that with the
Sony attack, because some of our viewers might not know this. Share a little bit about what happened.
So Sony was going to release a film about North Korea that apparently North Korea didn't care for. So there was a hack that occurred as a result of that to stop them from doing that.
This is the one where all the emails were exposed from Sony executives and people got fired, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. So, and that's a perfect example of it. But we also see it with news outlets as well. During the incident in Crimea a couple years ago, there were large attacks to news outlets in both Russia and the Ukraine, large attacks going back and forth there as well. We see this a lot. You know, it's been going on for many, many years, and organizations, especially media organizations, really need to be aware of that there is that type of censorship type of attack as well to stop them from doing certain things or saying certain things.
Media companies can't get out of the business of producing media,
No.
and there's going to be inherently stuff that's going to make somebody angry, and maybe we don't know why, but it will. What can folks do about that?
Well, first of all, they can communicate. They can start talking more about what they're doing to solve this problem, learn from each other, build that expertise, and then you can look at how you're protecting yourselves as a whole. Organizations need to look at not only hacking and data theft, but they need to look at things like DDoS attacks. You know, that's a great way of censoring an organization if you can't look the site up. Right. So these are things that everyone needs to look at and look at that attack surface that they have and make sure that they have their availability down, i.e. they're safe from DDoS attacks, or as safe as they can be from DDoS attacks. And then they look at the integrity. Is my data safe? Is my data secure?
One political issue actually that's come up over the last couple of years is personal information and data privacy. To your point about data, GDPR is now the law of the land here in Europe. Share with us how you think, what are the security implications here for GDPR?
Well, GDPR is a framework that requires organizations to not only have a certain level of protection for personal data, but also to disclose when they have a breach as well. In the past, organizations, they really didn't have to disclose this, but now they do. So that's like a forced immunization. You have to disclose these breaches, and you have to take the necessary steps. You have to be able to prove that you did due diligence. You performed your due diligence on the protection of that data. Now, breaches will occur, right? No one's immune to that. There's always a zero-day attack. Something will always happen. But it's the due diligence that goes behind that and the disclosure so everyone can learn. That's the important part of it.
You just mentioned zero-day, and again, some of our viewers might not know what that is. What is a zero-day attack, and kind of what's the emergency safety pin you use to kind of help you out when that happens?
Right, a zero-day attack is something new. We haven't seen it before. It's a new type of vulnerability that's being exploited, or a type of DDoS attack that's so large no one's ever seen it. It's something exploited that we haven't seen before. And the best way to manage those is to make sure that your security teams are match fit. Right, make sure that they drill regularly, they have good lines of communications, they practice, they know what to do in an event. So when they're taking care of the normal day-to-day security events, they're pretty much handling those by muscle memory, by rote. So when an event does occur, it frees them up to concentrate on what's important, right? They're concentrating on that zero-day event, manually mitigating the effects of that.
Really interesting. Jay Coley, thank you so much for being with us here on AkamaiTV. When we come back, we are going to hear from John Linder from Swiss Text. Stay with us for top of the hour AkamaiTV. Thanks very much.